What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Canes Insight Baseball Podcast, powered by Anajar and Levine Accident Attorneys. We are here with the star of the Bullpen Mafia podcast that is sweeping the baseball nation. College baseball fans, Marlins fans, former Marlins players, legends tuning in, jumping on the show. It is taken over. You got the gear on. You see the Bullpen Mafia hat. I'm about to get one of those myself. We'll put a link in the bio for those who want to get that. Javi Salas, Canes legend. How you doing?
I'm good, D. Appreciate that plug. Bullpen Mafia, we've had a fun ride so far. Me and my co-hosts, Eric Todoroff and Steven Peterson. You mentioned we've been talking Marlins. We've been talking baseball. Baseball's having its moment. I know we talk about it a lot on here, college baseball. Now professional baseball's got a little runway, a couple months with no other sports. So we're just hoping people catch on and ride the wave.
And look, we're hoping that wave extends to Canes baseball. A lot of additions, particularly when it comes to the pitching staff. We were going over Griffin Hughes, who's tearing up the Cape right now. Will Smith from Coastal Carolina, Carson Fisher. That podcast is in the archive. Like and subscribe if you want to get more of that kind of content. We're going to break down the remaining pitchers of the staff, the new additions, get into their game a little bit, and also talk about some sweeping changes to college baseball in terms of scholarship limits. But first, a word from some of the best friends that Canes baseball has.
This episode of the Canes Insight podcast is brought to you by our friends at Sala Astorita & Cox, a boutique law firm focusing on securities regulatory matters, broker-dealer and investment advisor regulation, white-collar criminal defense, complex commercial litigation, and securities arbitration and litigation. The firm aggressively represents clients throughout the nation. Contact them now at 561-989-9080 or visit them online at salalaw.com.
All right, Hav, listen, we're going to break down some players, but really there were some rule changes this week that go beyond any particular player, any particular program, and really are going to impact college baseball and college athletes like yourself.
Yeah, no, D, I think absolutely massive changes. You know, you talk about what college baseball was sort of handicapped by was the 11.7 scholarship number. You look at a roster of, 32 to 35 guys. That just means some guys have a lot more scholarship than others. You're piecing it together, a lot of student loans. Miami was in a unique situation where private university tuition much higher than some of our in-state foes. So, obviously that was a big factor in the recruiting process, negatively recruited by other schools saying, the high price of tuition for Miami, take out loans, put some pressure on your parents, financial aid, all these sorts of things. All wiped under the rug, right? All no longer will be a factor so long as the school is going to fund 34 scholarships, which it looks like they are going to. Looks like the big conferences, the ACC, the Big Ten, the SEC came out right away, said they want their schools to fund baseball fully. 34 scholarships, like I said, massive changes. I mean, for someone like myself, I was on a partial baseball scholarship. I got some academic money. So I know what that recruiting process is like. I know the difficult questions the coaching staff had to answer. Having to go against, like I mentioned, some of the in-state schools, the public schools that didn't have to have those conversations, a much lower tuition price point. Miami is now level with them. It is a much easier conversation to say, hey, we have 34 scholarships to go around, and your son is going to be the recipient of one of those.
Now, listen, it's kind of upward and downward, right? So there's upward as far as the scholarships, but the roster size is shrinking, right? So how does that interplay work?
Yeah, look, I can speak for Miami. I know that we have never carried the large rosters that some of the Floridas and Florida States. You hear about them in the fall. Sometimes they squad up 45, close to 50 in those locker rooms just because they can, right? These public schools have the ability to bring, guys on at a much lower price point. They load those rosters up. Miami's never been like that. Miami's always had smaller roster size. Usually what you see in the fall is what you're going to get in the spring. There is some attrition, obviously, naturally. But the roster size has always been around that 32 to 35. I don't expect it to be a big change for Miami in terms of roster depth. I think we're going to see the same style of roster that, Coach Morris, Coach Artiaga, Coach Damari, they've all constructed similar rosters in terms of numbers. But that 34 scholarships is going to be massive. Look, it's about time. I think college baseball, I keep mentioning it, it's had its moment, right? We've just seen this positive momentum sort of snowballing. We saw one more assistant coach added and being able to, paid assistant that college baseball so desperately needed. As this conference realignment is happening, we're seeing so much more positive momentum. The SEC, the ACC, two tremendous conferences leading the way. It's about time that this, the scholarships match up with the level of baseball that's being played.
So it's interesting from what you're telling me and what I understand as well is this really helps UM two ways, right? Or really, it helps UM in terms of the scholarships immensely because, like you mentioned, the tuition. But the drawback of it, making the roster smaller, doesn't really hurt UM. So
No.
it's almost the best of both worlds because you gain a competitive advantage against some of these big state schools.
Yeah, no, definitely a competitive edge. And like I said, the roster size is never really that large at Miami. You never see, the 40s into the 50s as some of the other schools. But again, the biggest factor here is that tuition price point. Miami's going to be able to be extremely competitive, go to market. And look, I think we're going to see a much broader national recruiting search going forward. Right now, you can go get guys from all over the country because there is the ability to, hey, there's a scholarship for you here. You're willing to come play at Miami, one of the best schools in the country, obviously tremendous tradition. So now it's just another selling point for Coach Arteaga and the staff.
Now, talk about all over the country. The pitching staff that Miami has assembled really is from all over the country, at least if we're talking about transfers. There's not a lot of kids coming back home. You did have Griffin Hugas, who we talked about earlier from Palm Beach, coming back to Miami. He's currently tearing up the Cape, ERA under 3. I think he's got like an 18-3 strikeout to ball ratio, or to base on balls ratio. Great stuff, which we've talked about on prior pods. So he came back. That was very good. But really, a lot of these guys, especially the guys we're talking about today, are from elsewhere coming to Miami, which has been a staple of Miami's program always. Of course, you're a local guy, but I know you play with guys from all over the country. So let's get into some of these names. First up is Rob Evans, big left-hander. He is from South Carolina, Lexington, South Carolina, 6'1", 214. He played at Chipola College out of high school. He's a big recruit. Ends up at Georgia State University and, does some nice things. The ERA doesn't jump out, which is kind of common here in the modern era. 3.2, 5.63 ERA, but 48 innings pitch. He did have 48 strikeouts, 24 base on balls. And really the stuff is, I think, what caught Miami's attention. Again, former big recruit and somebody who, when you look at the numbers, look at the raw stuff, watch the film, a lot to like here.
Yeah, definitely. I think that you're absolutely right in terms of what they're looking for, what they saw in a guy like Rob Evans. Obviously, a left-handed pitcher, you can never have enough of those. So I think a left-handed pitcher with that kind of upside, there's something in the tank there. Obviously, you named a big recruit. Chipola Junior College is a really, really competitive junior college in the state of Florida. Obviously, one of the best junior colleges. The whole state as a whole is a tremendous junior college, sort of breeding ground. But Chipola is one of the gems in the state of Florida. So obviously, a highly sought-after recruit. The upside is definitely there. Like I mentioned, a left-handed pitcher that you can never have enough of those. I think in terms of what we're looking for out of Rob Evans, I think, hopefully he can turn into one of those weekend rotation pieces. I'm looking at maybe a Sunday guy. I think he's one of those guys that's going to work his way into that weekend rotation just based off his stuff. We saw Herrick Hernandez sort of come into Miami raw, unpolished, finds his way, pitching on Sundays for last year's Hurricanes team. Similar, so I feel like a similar profile, has good strikeout stuff. With a guy like Rob Evans, you see a little bit of an elevated walk number, which I think is something that can be addressed. We've seen, this staff is something, obviously with two pitching coaches, Coach Arteaga, Coach Gutierrez, they're definitely going to hone in on that, get his mechanics right, hopefully be a key contributor to that weekend rotation. Again, I'm really excited about this, about this prospect in particular. Was diving into his film a little bit. Really good breaking ball, good feel for the fastball, pitches up in the zone. I keep talking about these guys that can pitch, horizontally. So, excuse me, not horizontally, they pitch vertically, they pitch up and down. So big breaking ball, elevated fastball, especially from a left-handed arm slot. I'm really excited to see what Rob Evans can bring next season.
Yeah, and I've seen some videos on him, just his personality. He seems like a guy that brings a lot of energy to the mound. And I think the Herrick Hernandez comp is something I've heard from people around that program as far as could he fill that void. Of course, Sunday wide open now with Herrick going on to the Atlanta Braves system. So be interesting to watch him. Reliever now, who with some very nice production, Jackson Cleveland, another bats lefty, but throws righty. So a righty here, 6 foot 190 out of Lamar, which had a really, really outstanding staff at a lower level. The numbers for Jackson Cleveland: 5 wins, 0 losses, 3.8 ERA. He did start 4 games, but I believe he's going to be primarily relief pitcher, 42 innings, 36 strikeouts, 9 balls. So strike thrower and somebody who's had some nice effectiveness at that level.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I saw from Cleveland's profile that I really liked was he's pitching some high leverage situations, right? You mentioned the starter, he has some versatility there. Was a two-way guy at one point in his career at Lamar, so there is some athleticism, something you'd like to work with. I know we saw it from Griffin Hugas, this athletic profile of pitcher that Miami's sort of attacking and going after. The third portion of the Cleveland profile that I liked was he's pitched late in games, right? So has a couple saves under his belt. Something obviously Miami really needs help is that middle relief, late relief. How do we get the ball? Last year we struggled so mightily getting the ball from the hands of the starting pitcher into Brian Walters and Nick Robert. A guy like Jackson Cleveland is the perfect fit to say, hey, go get me 5 or 6 outs in the middle of the game. Can you pitch the 6th and 7th for me? Let's get to Walters and Robert. We don't now, not saying that Walters and Robert are going to be in the back of the bullpen, but in that, let's get to the setup man closer situation. And look, if the stuff is there for a guy like Jackson Cleveland, I said he's pitching high leverage situations. He may be a guy that ends up pitching the 7th and 8th inning for this Miami Hurricanes ball club.
And you talked about it so much last year when we were talking about bullpen woes. It was these guys got good arms, but they're starters in high school learning how to be relief pitchers. This is someone who's been a relief pitcher, like you mentioned, high leverage situations, just like Will Smith at Coastal Carolina, who we talked about last show. So having guys that know how to be relief pitchers and have that maturity, I think is going to be one of the striking differences from this year's team to last year's team. And we were talking, I can't count how many times we came on after a tough weekend and said, we really saw our youth there in the bullpen. So excited to get an experienced guy there. You're also adding some experience in the rotation with Alex Garreau. So this is a really interesting name, the most recent of these guys to come in. Another right-hander, 6 foot 185. He's from Lake Oswego, Oregon, kind of close to where my dad grew up out there near Portland. And he went to the University of Hawaii and put up big numbers. Again, kind of like Lamar, Hawaii had a really, really good staff overall and really good pitching numbers. 7 wins, 3 losses, 3.43 ERA, 65 innings. So he pitched a ton. And this really jumps out to me. 66 strikeouts, 14 base on balls. He's not somebody with overpowering stuff, but he did strike out, a man an inning and really, really kept the walks low. Talking to some of our buddies with some scouting experience, some guys in the majors, I actually talked to multiple people about this guy. And the word I got was strike thrower. He's not really throwing in the 90s, which is a concern, obviously, as you get to the ACC level, but a certain certain parts of his profile, as far as the way the pitch comes in. What's that? You know better than me. That was the
tunneling,
the tunneling, and also the vertical angle, the VVA. So I got to try to keep up with these acronyms. There's always some new ones, but he apparently had a very good one that allowed his stuff to play up, and obviously the results are what you like.
Yeah, no, definitely. And look, I think we've talked to a lot of the same people about this prospect, Alex Garreau, and I think, obviously what you're getting in him is not going to be that wow. You're not getting Paul Skeens, but you're getting someone that knows exactly how to pitch, how to get outs. And look, the name of the game in baseball is getting outs, getting 27 outs before the other team can, right? So I think Miami, which struggled so mightily pitching in certain situations, this is a guy that's going to be super versatile for you, because I'm sure he's going to be able to take the ball from Coach Arteaga and he can go give you 6 or 7 innings. He's going to be able to pitch in middle relief on the weekends. Might be a guy who slots in on a weekday game. Well, Miami, who had so many woes in the midweek game. So this is I think a really, really solid addition, a solid piece. And I think what we saw, something that caught my attention, I think Lance Roffers was posting about it on the boards, was look at the rosters that were in Omaha and super regionals, the quality of middle relief. And it wasn't just quality, it was the experience, right? You hit on that right before this point. A lot of guys that had relief experience, a lot of guys who had pitched 2 and 3 years in college, not necessarily, freshmen right out of high school that Miami were sort of dealing with last year in some of these key situations. So a guy like Garreau is going to give a lot of confidence to Coach Arteaga, Coach Gutierrez, go get outs in a variety of different ways. And you talk about tunneling and the vertical angle of his fastball. Those are 2 things that it's sort of like adds a mystique to a pitcher. We see it so often at the major league level. Guys who don't have plus stuff, but get swing and miss, are able to get weak contact, induce, weak fly balls, ground balls. Giroux's going to be that guy. He was second team All Big West, so he's pitched at a level. Obviously, it's not the ACC, but he's going to come right in and be able to get outs and be a security blanket that Coach Arteaga did not have last year.
Vertical approach angle was what I was looking for. Apparently, he ranks high there. So you talked about it, kind of the relief, the starter. Do you see him more as a midweek guy going against similar competition to what he faced at Hawaii, or do you see him as a weekend reliever, or just going back and forth and doing both?
I think he's going to do both. I think his versatility will play up for him and give him the ability to pitch in any situation that Coach Arteaga needs, and that's extremely valuable. I think when you're looking at college baseball, the way it's going, right? I think obviously you're thrust into so many different situations throughout a weekend, and I would assume that Giroux's the kind of guy who's later in his career, has not necessarily gotten the professional opportunities. He just wants to win, I think, at this point in his career. He's come to Miami, obviously, for that. He's going to have the opportunity to pitch in weekdays, midweek games, weekends. I don't necessarily know if he'll have a starting rotation spot, but if the opportunity presents itself, if he has a good fall, a good spring, I don't see it out of the realm of possibility that Giroux gets some starts on the weekends for the Canes.
Now, did you pitch with anybody at UM that was in that high 80 range as a righty and able to get outs and be effective?
Look, I've pitched with a bunch of guys in the minor leagues who velocity was not their thing. Obviously, the game has changed. Even when I was in the minors, 6 and 7 years ago, the game has taken a total turn in terms of you don't necessarily see guys at that level of velocity anymore. It's usually like, low to mid 90s has sort of become the upper 80s of the past. So like everybody's throwing hard. Everybody's throwing much harder than when I was around. But look, I think at the end of the day, people tend to overrate velocity. Velocity allows you to get away with mistakes. And a guy like Giroux, you look at his historical walk numbers, he's not putting himself in situations where he's going to get hurt, right? A strike thrower, he has the ability to get ahead of guys. When you have the ability to get ahead, you can dictate counts. You can, move your fastball around. And look, with all the metrics that are coming out, the vertical attack angle is just one of those little data points that says hitters aren't necessarily seeing the ball all that well off of him, right? So that high 80s fastball, whatever he's throwing at, plays up. He has the ability to get outs. I think that's the most important thing that he brings to the table. And look, I think at the end of the day, Miami's sort of goal at, from a pitching standpoint was raising the floor of their bullpen, having, a more solid, less variability in between who was coming in and getting some of those outs for you. So having more trusted arms is worth its weight in gold here for Coach Arteaga.
So I was talking to Jim Salas today, legendary Canes baseball fan, someone who makes this podcast possible, a friend of both of ours. And he mentioned when we talk about Giroux, and really to a lesser extent, Jackson Cleveland, these strike throwing pitchers that maybe aren't overwhelming guys. He kept coming back to a single game, which I saw on TV, and I know you called, and everybody who saw that game remembers how bad it was, which was the Bethune-Cookman game, right? Where no one could throw a strike. It was, according to Jim, probably the worst game he's ever seen. I think it might have been one of the worst games you've ever called or been a part of. What do you think about that game with now that you're seeing strike throwers like this come in? Just take me through that. Because I know that was a very impactful game for you last year where you kind of were like at the height of your frustration.
Yeah, that game, I think no Hurricane fan that watched or had any part in that wants to relive that. It was certainly one of those games that you definitely want to wipe from your memory. I think it was Bethune-Cookman scored 6 runs, and none of them were by the way of actually the bat making contact with the ball. It was either hit by pitch or walked in. So just one of those situations. I think that was sort of the icing on the cake for everything you don't want to see in your pitching staff. It was a lot of falling behind in counts, letting hitters dictate counts. And I think the most important thing that in pitching, regardless of velocity, regardless of stuff, regardless of strikeouts, is can you throw strike one? Strike one, if you look at the history of baseball, batters are at such a disadvantage when strike one comes before ball one. And then, there's so many different leverage counts. You look at it, I remember you just learn so much about the game in a 1-1 count. If it's the difference between a 2-1 count and a 1-2 count is a massive, massive difference for hitters, right? So having the ability to have strike throwers, and I think strike throwers breed trust. Strike throwers breed confidence. The defense is playing much looser and freer. The batters have a much better rhythm. Regardless of whether you get hit or not, that's stuff you can't control. What you can control is throwing strikes. And I think, obviously that was a big, big sort of method, not necessarily a method, but something that they were really honing in on this offseason was, hey, let's go get more strike throwers. Let's go get more strike throwers in the middle of our bullpen. We want to make sure that we bridge, like I said, bridging that gap. Look, it's a 27-out game, and I always think about it. If you have a closer, you have a setup man, those are 6 outs, right? You hope your starter can get you 15. That middle of the game is so crucial. Those 6 outs in the middle of the game, usually that's where the game is won and lost. You want to throw guys out there that you can trust, that throw strikes, and are going to get your team back in the dugout quickly.
It's like it's all levels. I know there's a lot of baseball dads listen to this podcast. I'm going through it right now. My son recently moved up to kids pitch, and so many of those games are just walk after walk after walk. And it's like, get someone there throwing BP fastball so the team wakes up, because you could tell the difference even at that level with just the whole mood of the team when the ball goes over the plate, even if it's getting hit by a bat hard. It's just so different than what you see when you're given free passes. So excited to see not only more maturity, which we've been talking about out of this pitching staff, but of course more strikes. Another guy who doesn't miss a ton of bats, but does throw strikes and it has some interesting potential velocity is Rees Lumpkin out of Winthrop. Reason I say potential velocity, 6'6", 6'5", 200 pounds, out of Winthrop in Rock Hill, South Carolina, close to Charlotte there, right there on the border. He's somebody who he's got tape on YouTube and Twitter throwing, 94, 95, again, in a controlled kind of velocity oriented setting in a facility, but he was able to throw strikes in the college level. I'm told with him, a lot of people are banking on the development from now until February and March. So first of all, what do you see with Lumpkin, and how much can you really develop a guy this old who has, some physical tools?
Yeah, look, I think, the tape is sort of out on him. Obviously, he's a redshirt junior, so there's a lot of stats that sort of back up where he's been in his career. Started 10 games last year for Winthrop. So you're getting an experienced arm. Again, now this is the arm that's trying to take the next step in his career, right? You mentioned throwing in a controlled environment, trying to get his velocity up. You see that more and more often, right? I think guys are trying to find that pivot point in their career. Hey, can I find a little more, out of my body? What else is in there? And I think this is a low risk, sort of high reward play by this coaching staff. See what you can get out of this profile. Again, we've seen a change, right? He's a physical body, a 6'5", obviously the big frame. You're kind of banking on, hey, maybe he gets in our weight program, puts on some weight with the added, mechanical tweaks that he's made to sort of increase that velocity. Who knows what that velocity looks like in February and March? Is he going to be a starting pitcher at Miami? Who knows at this point? I think right now you're just banking on, hey, let's see what we got in him. Let's try and mold him. Let's try and get those the extra ticks and velocity, a big physical body. Maybe he puts on some weight. You never really know. So I like the pickup. Again, Miami's sort of trying to change the profile. You're getting another experienced arm. He's pitched at the collegiate level, started games, relieved games. He's not going to be, wowed by the environments. This is a really nice, solid add. Again, with some upside, a low risk, high reward kind of pickup for the Canes.
See, it's interesting to me. A guy like JD Arteaga, obviously, he's under a lot of pressure externally, right? People are disappointed what happened last season. You had the Alexander Rosario situation where he goes from not being very productive at the University of Miami to being probably one of the top pitching prospects in all of baseball in a way that's unusual. However, you also have Gage Zeal, who developed steadily, credited Miami's development with his progress, gets drafted by the Yankees and was an unbelievable player for UM. Rafe Schlesinger, Herrick Hernandez, there's some things you could point to as far as them developing and becoming more polished players, allowed to be drafted in the fourth round, but also some meat on the bone, right? That they weren't as dominant as their draft position would suggest. So kind of in the middle there. Do you see all these pitchers coming in and a young guy like Laz as an opportunity, Laz Colledo, who we talk about when we get to the high school kids down the road? Is this an opportunity for JD Arteaga to sort of rewrite the narrative and show that he can develop guys with all the guys coming in?
Yeah, I think certainly. And I think, as a teacher and an instructor, as a pitching coach, which is his background, that's exactly what you want, right? I think, first of all, Miami has a lot of selling points this offseason, a lot of opportunity, right? I think if you look at the 7 or 8 sort of named pitching roles, right, you have 3 starting pitchers on the weekend, a weekday, and then the 3 sort of setup closer guys. They're all wide open. So I think that's the number one selling point in the development, is saying, hey, you can take these jobs for yourselves as soon as we step foot on campus in the fall. And I think you're going to see the projects sort of, the Evans, the Lumpkins, the guys who are, sort of struggled with command, haven't had those big college jumps yet. Those are the guys that you might see the biggest increases in with a, a development system instituted by Coach Arteaga, Coach Gutierrez. I'm excited for them. Look, I think they've obviously shown to be the aggressor this offseason. Obviously gone out and gotten a ton of players, changed the roster, overhauled it basically overnight. You mentioned there are some pieces that are still missing. I think there are a couple of names that, hopefully Miami will be able to solidify and sort of bring in these last couple of weeks here before school starts. But again, you mentioned the development curve. We have 3 pitchers drafted in the top 4 rounds. That is, not a lot of schools in the country can say that. Say whatever you want about the results last year. Major league teams are looking at Miami. They're looking at their pitchers and saying there's something there. There's guys that we think can pitch at the big league level. There's guys that we think are in that system that can fit our system. So there's some proof in the pudding there. I think that this is going to be a really telling sort of season of development for Coach Arteaga, Coach Gutierrez. They're not getting the high school guys. They're getting some of the college guys who have been coached by other programs, have other pitching coaches sort of mold and sort of, try and tinker with their, mechanics and try and get more strikes, velocity, whatever it is. They're going to have the opportunity to do that this offseason. And look, some of the names you mentioned today might play some really big roles for the Canes this offseason. I mean, this season, 2025. So a lot to be excited about. These names are some that you're going to get more familiar with as we get closer to the season, as fall ramps up. But look, a ton of opportunity at the University of Miami, a ton of guys coming in, a ton of guys that are going to be able to etch their names into the history books of the Hurricanes.
And by the way, that's Alejandro. Sorry, I said Alexander. I've been in Miami Beach too long. I know people in the comments killing me. I've been in Miami Beach too long, but hopefully that's the exception, not the rule. We got more Gage deals, and like you said, guys like him, who he didn't have the team success to really etch his name there, but anyone who saw that Clemson game last year, some of the starts that he had, has a very fond memory and very warm place in their heart for a Gage deal. And he said it himself. He goes, I was developed here. I came here because I developed. I don't think he was in a hurry to leave. You get drafted by the New York Yankees. Of course, that's hard to turn down. But I mean, I think he was somebody who really liked his experience, liked being coached and developed by these guys. So you want more of those guys for sure. Like you said, etch their name in the books here alongside Mr. Javi Salas and others who have had that kind of success at the University of Miami. So again, thank you everybody for listening. Like, subscribe, check out CanesInsight.com and the Canes baseball message board. Always hot, great community there. And don't forget about the Bullpen Mafia podcast for your broader baseball needs. Awesome job by Javi, Toad, and the boys. I really enjoyed that listen. So we'll be here with the remaining transfers, the bats. We'll be doing that on a later episode, so stay tuned for that. And until then, go Canes.